Good morning. Not only is it a beautiful day, today I feel there's such a sense of hope as we return to our ministry of parish and schools as we reopen following this pandemic. My name is Kelly Branneman. I'm the Secretary for Catholic Schools and the Superintendent of Schools. And I would like to first introduce Father Dan Carson, who will share with us a few opening comments and lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Kelly. It's a joy to be with all of you here this morning. A few opening comments I did want to express to all of you, especially our gratitude for the past 16 months, all the challenges you faced during this COVID crisis, and worked so hard together to ensure the mission of the church and evangelization remains strong. And we're coming out of this challenging time seeing a lot of strength, and even seeing some growth. Also commend you on all the ways you did it, the new digital platforms, all the precautions and cleaning measures you had to take, and how you welcome back people and are continuing to do that in so many thoughtful, safe, and different ways. Now with the widespread vaccination opportunities and more effective treatments, lower case incidents, in general, we now feel we can look forward and to the future for more full engagement as the missionary disciples were called to be. I'm very pleased to say we have with us today Janine from Pastoral Ministry, Sarah and Kate Lee from Catechesis, Kelly and Chris from Catholic Schools to guide you with guidance to support the process of welcoming the faithful back into the parish community after all this experience, and do it in a still responsible and safe way. For this to be done successfully, it will be more important than ever for parish and school leaders to plan together, collaborate to meet the needs of the entire parish. Ministry leaders can discuss how to utilize shared spaces in a way that keeps members safe as we continue to navigate what are hopefully the last vestiges of COVID. Again, I thank you very much for your service as we work to return our parishes and our environments to fully be open and fully do the mission of our church, claiming the gospel and saving souls. God's grace has seen us through this point, and we trust in Him to shepherd us always. Always be assured of my own prayers for all of you and all the good work you do. I would like now to welcome you to join me in an opening prayer, and then we'll get started. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we come together in the name of your Son to glorify your name. You have poured your Spirit out upon the members of your church, giving each of us gifts for the building up of your kingdom. We ask you, Father, to strengthen these gifts and help us to generously use them to your purpose within the various ministries we have to serve your people within the parishes. Though our gifts and ministries are different, help us unite them together to serve our parish families and our co-workers. May our unity as brothers and sisters be a witness to the greater community that we are all one body in your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Dan. We have a panelist that has worked on collaborating on our initiative to reopen parishes and schools, and I would like now for everyone to take a moment and introduce themselves.
Thank you, Kelly. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. I am Dr. Janine Marino, and I'm the Secretary for Pastoral Ministry and Social Concerns.
Hi, I'm Sarah Blauvelt, and I am likewise very happy to be here with you today, and I am the Director for Catechesis for the Archdiocese.
Again, I'm Kelly Branneman. I'm the Secretary for Catholic Schools and Superintendent of Schools.
Good morning, I'm Chris Buckleitner, and I'm in the schools office. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for School Operations and Student Services.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Caitlin Javier. I am the Coordinator for Adult Faith Formation and Hispanic Catechesis, and I will be serving as your moderator for today's presentation. And so before we begin, we just want to run through some few logistics, some housekeeping details. First and foremost, the presentation will be done completely in English, but we do have available for download the handouts for the presentation in English and in Spanish. So you will find on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a tab that has an option that says handouts. and it has a little arrow that you can click on that allows you to download the English version of the presentation and the Spanish version of the presentation. We will also be receiving questions throughout the presentation. In our questions box, you will see there's a question box and a chat box where you can submit questions and any comments that you may have, and we will share those questions with our panelists at the end of the presentation, along with any comments that you may have. If we have limited time and we're not able to answer all of your questions during our time together, we will be sure to follow up with an email with any concerns or questions that you may have. Bienvenidos a todos nuestros familiares, a todos nuestros amigos, nuestros colaboradores de parroquias de habla hispana. Esta mañana estaremos hablando sobre la reapertura de nuestras parroquias, la reapertura de nuestras escuelas. La presentación del día de hoy será en inglés, pero le hemos ofrecido todo el texto de la presentación también disponible en español. Así que en la parte derecha de su pantalla van a ver que hay una opción que dice Handouts, y ahí van a poder seleccionar la presentación con el texto en inglés, tanto como el texto en español. También tenemos disponible una opción para preguntas, donde durante toda la presentación pueden ofrecer sus preguntas, sus comentarios, que estaremos compartiendo con los panelistas al final de la presentación. Así que muchas gracias por estar con nosotros y bienvenidos. And with that, I would just like to turn it over to Ms. Kelly Brannaman, who will start us off.
Thank you, Kate. So why are we here? It's been, I think, a goal of Sarah and Janine and I for quite some time to work together and collaborate with regard to returning to as much normalcy as possible as we enter into the next August-September timeline for both schools as well as parish programs and catechetical programs. And so our time together today, first and foremost, I hope we model collaboration that we would like to see at our parishes and schools. And so as we work through our time together this morning, we will share with you the message of collaboration. We'll share the message of our efforts to provide you as much information as we can regarding current health and safety guidelines for both parish and school programs. And then the opportunity to make certain that you have heard the message from us, that we are here to support you, and we are here to support all parish ministries to resume full use of both the parish facilities and school space to pre-pandemic operations. And so that's our goal. There's health and safety guidelines that will be reviewed with you that are have been lifted. And of course, every day, I think we get new information that changes the way in which the state or our local communities are responding to the decline in cases and the greater return to normalcy. And so this is a snapshot in time of June 17th, 2021. But our goal today is to guide you through this process and to hope to not only empower you with information that you may need, but also the inspiration how you locally can return back to your own parish programs and school programs and collaborate and plan for the future use of our parish and school spaces.
Thank you, Kelly. As you've heard Father Carson and Kelly already say, thank you all so much for your work the past 16 months. And also thank you for your dedication and your efforts to minister to people and to keep our people safe. After the isolation of the past year, we are indeed in need of community and to return to a sense of normalcy. As our region, our parishes, and our schools are returning to normal ministry, Cardinal Gregory has spoken about our need for community and our in-person interactions. In baptism, we are marked by the Holy Spirit. The Spirit moves us, unifies us, and fortifies us, including moving us together to gather in community for prayer, study, fellowship, and to celebrate the Eucharist as a community of believers. While virtual events have served us well over the past year and will continue to serve us in some situations, virtual events are no substitute for in-person interaction. With more people being vaccinated, the risk of COVID-19 transmission has been declining since early June 2021 to less than 3 positive cases per 100,000 people in the District of Columbia and less than 2 cases per 100,000 in Maryland. It is with this in mind that we can start moving towards resuming to in-person activities and events. Sarah, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thank you. So, you know, as we think about this, we have to look at the landscape because as we're looking forward to returning to ministry, and I hesitate to use the word normal, I think what we're going to see is something that's more familiar. That's what we're looking for, and coming together as communities of believers physically is something that's familiar and comforting. At the same time, we really need to be aware of the people that we're serving. You know, the church has always taught us to look at the landscape of who it is we're trying to serve so that we can serve them best. So a few things we need to consider. Some of our parishioners, whether they're vaccinated or not, may not feel safe gathering together. And while we may long for that, we need to bear that in mind and be sensitive to those concerns. You know, even to the point of if someone is wearing a mask and you're not, you know, offering to say, would you like me to put a mask on? Just simple courtesies like that, I think are going to be things we need to think about. Many of our staff members, volunteers, and parishioners are going to still be grieving, whether it's the loss of someone due to the pandemic, a job, a home, the way of life that we're familiar with. You know, even as, you know, the statistics that Janine shared are great, we also yesterday hit, you know, the loss of 600,000 lives to COVID-19 in our country. So there is a lot of grief that people may be experiencing, and we need to try to have conversations with them to help make sure that we're sensitive to their needs. Again, pastoral and cultural sensitivity, we just really need to begin this process of returning to in-person ministry by listening to each other. Listening is so different in person than it is online, and so we need to recapture that skill and keep that as a hallmark of how we move forward. We need to balance our gatherings. As much as we would like to get together, we don't need to have 500 people in a space right now. That may not be the best way to return. So we need to think about how are we balancing this desire to be together with still some prudence and attentiveness to the health and safety of everyone. And, you know, flexibility is key. How are we going to plan effectively, but also be open to change? And, you know, even as we were creating this webinar over the last 2 weeks, the parameters and guidelines have changed almost every day. So flexibility is going to be key in what we do as we move forward. And before I pass it back to Kelly, I think just one thing for us to remember is that ministry's never been a one-size-fits-all, and that is even more true now. We really need to think about how we're going to approach ministry in a way that's familiar but safe. Kelly?
Thank you, Sarah. I like the word familiar. I think that's a very, very good and important word. So our time together today, just to share with you just a broad overview, you can see in front of you that we're going to touch upon, again, health and safety practices, that we're going to dive a little deeper into parish, adult, and youth events and gatherings with Janine, and Sarah will talk a little more about specifically catechetical programs, and I'll share a little bit of a condensed version of what our schools have been given as far as guidance for reopening in the 21-22 school year. We'll also share with you in our toolkit, we have not only this PowerPoint, but a resource for you that's in more detail. It describes many of the things we're touching upon today with a series of appendices that will support you in your work and planning for next year.
Thank you, Kelly. We wanted to highlight before we get into the main part of this presentation, that we have two audiences that we're addressing today. One, parish and school employees and parish and school volunteers. We know that we cannot effectively minister to our people and our communities without our employees and our volunteers. In fact, without them, we wouldn't be able to proclaim the gospel and reach as many people as we do. Employees are paid ADW parish staff members and are subject to ADW's HR policies, while volunteers are unpaid and are not subject to HR policies. However, volunteers still must be in compliance with our child protection and safe environment policies, as well as certain other ADW policies like the Code of Conduct. Volunteers are not required to return to in-person ministry since they are not paid employees. We encourage you to have conversations with staff and volunteers about their concerns regarding returning to in-person formation and learning if they have not already returned. And with that, I'd like to turn the slide over to, I think, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Janine. Sarah mentioned it earlier about the flexibility. Blessed are the flexible, for they will not be bent out of shape. This is a very, very fluid situation. And I think it's worth mentioning that in Maryland, Governor Hogan just a couple of days ago announced that our state of emergency would be ending July 1st. And as far as the state has released a lot of the COVID requirements, really all of the COVID requirements coming on July 1st. So obviously, you know, we are evaluating from a school standpoint how this will impact us. And of course, we have June, July, August to really look at this. But stay tuned for further updates throughout the summer. But I want to share with you what we have today as we've worked on this for the past 5-6 weeks. But this is where we are today. We want to talk about 5 key prevention strategies. The universal and correct use of masks and face coverings, the physical distancing aspect, hand washing and respiratory etiquette, cleaning and maintaining healthy facilities, and contact tracing in combination with isolation and quarantine in the event that there is potential COVID positive case. We want to know who was where and when to be able to report that. Next slide, Sarah. So first we'll get into the physical distancing and where we are today. So we know that we came back to school this year and schools were safe. Our pastors, our principals, our teachers did an outstanding job with ensuring the 6-foot physical distancing, and our children were able to return successfully and safely. We have reduced the physical distancing to 3 feet, but we do want to add this. We know that we have several schools and with multiple classrooms who need a little bit less than 3 feet. And they have reached out to us and are working with us. And we do feel that they are able to do that safely. We think that 3 feet is kind of a great standard at this point. But we also say that use the space in the classroom effectively. If you can space the children out at 4 feet, that's wonderful. If you can use 5 or 6, please do so. But when you get below the 3 feet, we would like to be engaged just to see, just for one, that we know that, you know, which schools or classes are less than 3 feet. But also we'd like to work closely with those schools to ensure the safety of the staff and the students. So we're looking at 3 feet today. We know that's very flexible, and we know that that could be changing in the future. But if schools, there are a couple of schools who will need that less than 3 feet, and they have reached out to us, but we will work with those schools if need be. 6 feet all other times for adults. Now, we also know that they're currently vaccinating children as young as 12 years old. So we have a lot of children in our schools who are not vaccinated. And we do have a few adults who are not getting vaccinated at this point. So we do want to keep our adults safe, and we want to make sure that they are able to stay 6 feet apart as much as possible. And we also ask that students in all other times than seated and learning, that they remain 6 feet apart as much as possible. For instance, when they're walking in the hallways, to prevent gatherings and clusters of students, possibly at the lockers. And we also would say that students can be outdoors without face masks, but if they are without face masks outside, then we would ask that they are continuing to stay 6 feet apart without their face masks outside. So face masks must be worn at all times in the building. That's the current regulation from us, from ADW. Anytime in the building, staff, students, if they're in the building, they should be wearing their face coverings. Now, we know that teachers or office administrators, when they're in their room, their office space alone, they are certainly capable or eligible to take the mask off. And when they're eating and they're socially distanced, of course, they're taking their mask off. Parish activities will follow parish guidelines. So we can call Sarah if you would like to just elaborate a little bit on how that comes into play.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So with the difference between the schools where our students are there all day long, and the expectation is that they are wearing face coverings, and that's been a directive of the Archdiocesan Catholic Schools Office. The reality for parishes may be different. If at all possible, we are recommending that our students still wear masks at all time, especially since Chris noted we have so many kids who are going to be under 12 and not fully vaccinated. So my guidance is recommending that face coverings be worn at all times in the interim. This may change before we get to September and the beginning of the new catechetical year. But we need to be prudent and, attentive to the fact that students may not be vaccinated, as will some of our volunteers may or may not be vaccinated. At the same time, we know that parishes, for mask wearing is not required. So it's important for you to have a conversation with your pastor to talk about how he would like to have this align with, the mask guidance, or if he just says, no, it's, he has a different expectation. So again, these conversations are going to be essential in making sure. And if you're at a parish where there's a school, it would be helpful to chat with the principal as well to say, can we present a unified policy so it's not so confusing if I'm in this building or in that building or in this activity or that. So at this point, for catechesis, masks are not mandated at all times, but strongly recommended.
Thank you, Sarah. So daily screening within schools. This year, our schools were screening staff and students upon arrival. And we got feedback from them, and some felt that they weren't sure how much, how effective it might have been in screening out potential virus. But what they did notice was that it was a very powerful gesture for parents, knowing that kids were going to be screened at school, and parents did an outstanding job of keeping potentially symptomatic children home. And we've heard a lot of feedback that there was very little flu, very little colds, probably as a result of everybody being hyper vigilant and keeping their children home if they had a sore throat or a cough. So we heard from our principals, and they want to keep some sort of screening. And so we're asking that schools continue to screen, and they have a choice. They can either do it the way they did this year and doing it upon arrival, or there are multiple apps or other ways that they can do it where the parents can self-report and take a quick temperature of the child and ensure that the student, the children, are coming to school without symptoms. So we'll continue to do that this year. We'll also ask that schools continue to have procedures for essential visitors. So the essential visitors are those who are coming to offer student services, or they may need to come to the building to access for important school matters, necessary deliveries, or potentially an emergency. But these visitors coming to the school should also follow protocols, temperature screening. They should obviously be wearing masks as they come into the building. And I know that CSO members were out and about visiting a lot of schools just a few weeks ago in regards to the Golden Apple Awards. And our schools were doing an outstanding job of screening, the visitors and ourselves coming to their buildings to ensure that we were entering safely and not potentially, contaminating the school. So we'll continue with those procedures. We also talk a little bit about schedules, and that teachers or volunteers, they're encouraged to move whenever feasible. If a student's move class to class, we do require the general cleaning between the groups. This is basically just a quick wipe down of the desks. If teachers are moving, then maybe it's just the desk, maybe a keyboard or a shared podium. So it's much easier to have the teachers move, but we also know it's not always feasible to have the teachers moving class to class. So if the students are moving, then we are continuing to ask that the general cleaning is happening between the groups, the student desks or keyboards, depending on where they are. So we'll talk a little bit about the difference between a regular and routine cleaning versus disinfecting, okay, as needed. So the routine cleaning could just be soap and water, basically. It removes dirt, dust, and it does remove germs from surfaces. This is something that is probably done each evening at the school, and this is the routine, the daily type cleaning. Disinfecting is specific germ-killing chemicals that are used on surfaces as needed. A child gets sick on the floor or a desk, or that there was a case of COVID in a particular classroom. So there are different chemicals that are used. It's more in depth. And we do have the differences spelled out in the document, in the appendices, between a general routine cleaning and what a heavier disinfecting would look like.
So Chris, between students that exchange classes or events, they would use cleaning?
Correct.
Not disinfecting. And then between a evening catechetical program and school the next day, for students, it would just be cleaning?
Correct, yes. And next slide. Looks like, I think we are one more slide, and that's Kelly.
All right, so one of the things we also wanted to touch upon, the Human Resource Office worked a great deal last fall as we and our schools re-entered in person, and we felt like it was probably good to revisit this component of employee management and management of staff that may be asked to return in person for the first time. And so their guidance to us, and certainly I'm not the Human Resource Office, so specific questions and regard to employment, I would direct you to speak with Nanette Lowe or Melissa Holder Murray with regard to those. But just a brief overview in regard to that. First and foremost, of course, anyone that communicates to their manager, the concern with returning to in-person or, being with children or being in groups of individuals. First of all and foremost, those should be private and confidential conversations with the employee. And the support that the Office of Human Resource has given to us in the Pastoral Center, in our parishes, and in our schools is when those questions from employees who are not comfortable with returning to in-person work, to make sure that we utilize the expertise of the Human Resource Office and that any changes to an employee's job function be discussed with them. And that could result in the individual taking FMLA or receiving ADA accommodations if they have pre-existing conditions. We should certainly monitor and watch absences. And if we have, any change in duties or schedules for the individual, there shouldn't be any change in pay with an employee unless it's vetted through the Office of Human Resource. And of course, those protocols that might include changing job descriptions by the nature of the fact that they'll return in person. We should work closely with the Office of Human Resource to make those updates and changes and to work with the employee to be clear and communicative to them with regard to those changes or updates. And so they always ask all of us that are managers of staff to please not approve or modify any employment agreements or positions without changes, without communication to the Office of Human Resource. And we certainly wouldn't make accommodations for one individual that we wouldn't afford or be given to every person that we employ in the parish or school. I think now we're over to more specifics. And so Janine.
Thank you, Kelly. I want to review some guidelines on the use of parish and school facilities as we resume ministry. And when we're talking about parish adult and youth events and ministry, this includes catechetical ministry and catechetical programs. Sarah will present in just a couple slides an issue specific to catechesis, but these do apply, and the use of facilities apply to all parish ministries. So parishes and adjoining schools are one Catholic community. School personnel and students at times utilize parish facilities, and parish ministries at times use parish school space for activities outside of regular school hours. Therefore, close collaboration with the parish pastor, the parish staff, and the principal are essential for shared spaces. Close collaboration between the pastor, parish staff, and principal will ensure that health and safety guidelines and child and protection requirements are met. Ministry groups using shared space should also be aware of and respect school protocols. Likewise, schools using parish space should be aware of and respect parish protocols. As a practical note, to minimize disruption, ministry groups are asked not to move furniture. Sarah, if you can advance to the next slide. So as we keep returning to more and more in-person events, we encourage parishes to continue the best practices that they've developed over the last 16 months with regards to communications. Namely, please continue to communicate and over-communicate that anyone who is sick should and can stay home from Mass and any in-person ministry or activities. Additionally, when possible, please provide online or teleconference options for in-person events and gatherings. It will also be necessary to continue to provide ongoing updates to staff, volunteers, and parishioners about safety protocols for indoor and outdoor parish gatherings as local jurisdictions provide updates. As you heard Chris say recently, just this week, the state of Maryland issued new guidance about wearing masks. and we're waiting for how the local jurisdictions will implement this new state guidance. So please continue to be flexible. As we return to in-person events, please note that overnight and off-site trips and retreats are allowed, provided that the parish is in compliance with our child protection and safe environment policies and any requirements from Catholic Mutual and local COVID-19 guidelines for jurisdictions. Please continue to follow the established protocols and policies with respect to shared transportation. Sarah, if you can go to the next slide. We know that many of our parish gatherings involve hospitality and food as an important part of welcoming and community life. Events offering hospitality and other parish gatherings with food are no longer discouraged, provided that the parish has a plan regarding how to safely serve food or beverages that's communicated to staff and volunteers ahead of time. All food distribution must comply with local jurisdiction guidelines, and we are recommending that individually boxed and plated and prepackaged food be used when possible. And as has always been the case, food provided by outside parties must continue to comply with the Office of General Counsel's facility usage policies. Sarah, if you can go to the next slide. One question that we have encountered during the last 16 months is about CYO. CYO is a parish-based ministry. It is not a third-party vendor or an outside group. This summer, CYO is organizing and conducting pilot in-person athletic programs, and the plan for the fall is to have normal in-person sports resume. CYO has no plans to require proof of vaccination for coaches or participants. Since in-person sports have very specific guidelines that are different from parish and school activities, CYO staff will be holding a webinar for athletic directors on June 23rd at noon. This webinar will have specific updates on new policies and procedures for CYO. Pastors are welcome to attend this webinar, so I encourage you to please contact Kevin Donahue, the president and CEO of CYO. His contact information is on the slide, and Kevin would be more than happy to have you join this webinar. And at this point, Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about specifically catechetical programs.
Great, thank you, Janine. And I just want to note, I see that we've got questions and chat comments coming in. We are holding all of those until the end. So, trust that we will answer your questions as best we can. And if you have questions that you've not yet submitted, please go ahead and do so. Kately's monitoring those, and she'll start feeding those to us once we've finished up with the slide presentation. So, as I mentioned before, some of this aligns very closely with what the school expectations are, and some of it is a little bit more fluid based on the nature of the catechetical programming, where it's an hour once a week as opposed to 5 days, 8 hours a day. So health screening is still a good idea. As Chris mentioned, there was such a decrease in the number of cases of colds and things like that. So we should, and Janine also said, we want to communicate and over communicate the need to do some kind of screening and really encourage our families that if a child is sick or if they're not feeling well, and it's an adult event, please, stay home. We need to, if you're a program that is very attentive to taking attendance every week, great, I love that. But also let's not be too punitive if there are people who are sick and should not be with us. I'm not as familiar with the apps that Chris mentioned, but certainly if that's something if you're at a larger program and want to look into something like that, I am sure that Chris can help connect you with those. Again, the mask usage, we've kind of addressed this already. We do need to be careful with our younger children. and sensitive to the fact that while, you know, you may be the parent of a younger child and you're not as concerned about mask usage, there may be another parent who is. So as best you can, adopt a policy that recommends and requires, if your pastor is comfortable with that, mask usage for our younger students. We think at this point it's best for our volunteers to continue wearing masks. Again, if the situation changes dramatically and continues to improve, by the fall, this may not be the case. But for now, especially in our programs where the space where the students are meeting is very small, it would be better to err on the side of asking our volunteers to wear a mask. Okay, let's see here. So a couple specifics for RCIA and adult formation. I have to say that the virtual and online models for particularly RCIA and adult formation were probably some of the most successful that we saw over the last year in terms of, you know, some people, the catechumenal model where they didn't have to be at the parish every week was really helpful. That's important for us to bear in mind, but also the catechumenal process is communal. So this is an opportunity, I think, for catechetical programs to retain what was a particular value in the past year, but really try to meet as much in person as you can. And as you do this, consider using different spaces. If, you know, you were in a closet-sized room, which some of our parishes meet in such places, you know, is there a place where you could meet more in a more open space? You know, and even if, is it possible to sometimes meet in the church space, because that's also a possible good methodology, particularly for RCIA. And hospitality, as Janine mentioned, it's no longer, there's no longer the policy that we're discouraging food at our events. We know that hospitality is essential. We just want you to be very attentive to how you offer food, and not only food, but coffee service, you know, with the cream and the sugar and the stirrers and things like that. Make sure you are spacing out your hospitality so that you don't have a large group of people hovering right around the coffee pot. So just being attentive to those. And again, I refer you back to, you know, some of the statements that Janine made on food safety. For children's catechesis, you know, we're hoping that as many parishes as possible can return to in-person ministry. I know that we had quite a few that actually navigated in-person ministry for most of last year, and kudos to all of you. You know, but other parishes are going to now be looking to say, okay, how do we return to in-person ministry? So as you're thinking about that, again, there may be elements you want to integrate that were particularly successful last year that were online or virtual. You're free to do that. As you're planning, though, I just want to remind you that every year parishes are asked to provide, or mandated to provide, 30 hours of intentional faith formation a year. So you don't have to have 30 hours in a classroom, but you do need to establish some kind of accountability to know that you are attaining or, you know, superseding that 30-hour minimal goal. We will have, of course, annual safe environment training is required. Again, it's always required. This year, that may not be done online. Last year, of course, we had to do safe environment training online. As you're planning, safe environment training must be done in person this year. And then finally, we are planning for all the students in grades 3 to 8 to take the faith knowledge assessment. Typically, we've offered a fall option for parish religious ed students, but we're just not going to do that this year. We're just going to offer the assessment period will be in the spring, and it will be March 27th to April 10th, and I will send that information out to you in my next catechetical leader update. So, okay, pass it back over to schools.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I wanted to make sure that we did touch upon some school-related issues or guidance that was provided to us. We met with principals at our principal collaboration day in late May. and we gave a preview of this content. And one of the first things that was communicated by me to our school leaders is that parish ministries will resume, and our full use of space at the parish, at the school, will be utilized with all parish ministries, religious education, CYO, ADW ministries. And so I know that as we engaged in the fall and spring of last year, I think some of our principals may have held tight to their school buildings, and I want everyone to know the message that was provided to them on frequent occasions in May, that we're reopening all parish programs and the use of space. The other guidance that we have provided is a clear expectation that next year is school 5 days a week. There is predominantly school in person. We took parent surveys, and schools made their own parent surveys locally with families. We are offering some virtual school options for students that are seeking it, but the preliminary and predominant guidance and expectation is that we are back to the familiar schedule of school 5 days a week in person. The important date that I wanted you to know is that we have a process in place where schools complete their plans locally, submit them to the Catholic Schools Office, and we will provide them an approval by July 1st. And so Chris and his team are working hard right now, reviewing those school plans and making sure that they check the boxes of all the necessary things that we require. And I think that's important for everyone in the audience today to know that, so that if you want to see the school plan, to make sure that you understand how the building will be used for school, social distancing, where desks will be placed, and those sorts of things. Know that most of our schools should have a plan approved by the schools office by July 1st. We do, as Chris had mentioned before, we are resuming extracurricular activities and clubs. That does move students around the building more. So required cleaning for those types of engaged groups. It might be grouping students other than self-contained classrooms, and so we'll monitor that as we reopen in the fall, but the expectation is that it's a site-based decision whether we allow for those new activities to resume that might have students in mixed groups. We do have field trips, and you know, we also do site school visits for students that are interested in enrollment. So those will continue to we will reinstate those, and we'll resume those with safety protocols in place. I think that with regard to field trips, it's not only what our guidelines for safety are, but also the location that schools and students may be visiting. And so we would certainly, to engage in indoor field trips, we would certainly follow the safety protocols, not only for our school, but also the safety protocols that might be communicated as the location that they would be visiting. We are resuming before and after care, and we are bound to follow those state and district guidelines for student teacher ratios. That's different from schools for us. We have more guidance and stipulations that we must follow from the state and the district with regard to both before and after care and early learning. And then this one I think is important, that we're encouraging our schools as much as possible to keep their self-contained environments. That keeps students together in the same cohort from pre-K through 5th grade. And then the reality is that we have mixed groups for 6th, 7th, and 8th. And the hope also that many of those children have vaccines. And so we are reinstating our mixed groups of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in moving classrooms, moving classes. Chris mentioned that it's always easier for the educator or the catechist to move versus children, but we are seeing that our schools are resuming 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, movement of classes because of their schedules. But keeping similar cohorts in 5th through down through preschool is a major goal that we have, but we also realize that's perhaps not what a school may be able to accomplish, because many of them also have different groupings for 4th and 5th grade, or 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students. And then lastly, this is for the schools piece. We do collect vaccination information on children, period, but we have yet to receive any state guidance or specific guidance for how our schools will collect COVID vaccine information on our children. We've given guidance, and the HR has provided guidance to parishes and schools with regard to collecting employee vaccination information, but we have not yet determined guidance on how we'll collect student vaccination information at this time. And I think we can move to the next slide. Kaylee, I'll turn it over to you for some logistics. Unless there's any closing comments Janine or Sarah would like to make before we pivot to questions.
Nope.
So thank you all so much for such an informative presentation. That was wonderful. We do have a number of questions, so we're just going to kind of work through these slowly, but just a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions as we're going through these, you can please submit them in the questions or in the chat box. If you're having any difficulty accessing the questions or the chat box, please feel free to send me an email, javierk@adw.org. We've also received a few requests for the PowerPoint presentation to be sent via email. I am happy to forward that along. Again, just send me a message or a comment or an email at javierk@adw.org, and I'm happy to forward that to you. So starting with the first question, does the use of school space include classroom for catechetical programs? I believe that was addressed briefly, but just wanted to share that with the group as well.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. This question is more for Chris, who was mentioning the daily screening options, the apps, and those kinds of things. The question is, are there examples or maybe names of these things that could be shared as examples for parishes and schools to use?
There are, yes. In our document that you will receive very soon, possibly this afternoon or tomorrow, in the document, the apps, there are some examples that are listed. Some schools use the student information system, which is Rediker. Some schools are using a Google document that they share out. And then there are some specific apps that you could download to your phone. I do not know what the cost is. I understand that it's very minimal. And they are listed in the document. And you're certainly welcome if you would like to email me. I can pull that list of names and share that out with you if you don't see it quickly in the document.
Thank you, Chris. And then a follow-up question to that. How long?
Just a real quick question. I want to, or a statement. I just want to follow up a little bit on that. The document that Chris is referring to is, in addition to the slides that you're, seeing now, there's returning to in-person parish and school guidelines document that is about 40 pages long, 30 or 40 pages long. We're finalizing that. It will go out to pastors first. We're hoping today or tomorrow. Once it has been sent to pastors, it will be sent then to all the various ministry groups and schools. So your pastor will get that soon, and then you will have access to that entire document, which has much more information about all of the slides that we presented this morning. So everybody will be getting that, whether they attended the webinar or not. Sorry, Kaylee.
That's okay, thank you. That was one of our other questions, so thank you for that. And a follow-up question is, how long are parishes or schools required to keep this screening documentation that they receive?
The screening documentation?
As in the information that they gather, whether it's through the apps or the Google form for that health screening, the daily health screening.
They don't have to keep anything other than if a student was symptomatic, they can actually record that privately for their own records. But if children were clear, there is no reason to record and hold on to that information. But confidentiality is important. So if a student or staff had symptoms, that should be just retained privately.
Perfect, thank you. And since we're on the note about health screening and those kinds of things, we received another question. This one is with regards to RCIE, RCIC, RCI Adapted for Children. and children catechetical programs, will they also be required to gather COVID vaccination information for their students?
We are not mandating that you ask for proof of vaccination, just as we have not done that for mass attendance. We're trusting that, people who are not fully vaccinated are going to continue to wear masks, but there is no mandate that you have to ask for proof of vaccination. However, if your pastor is asking for staff or volunteers to do so, then that would supersede our general guidelines.
And Kaylee, if I could just follow up, schools has not asked or been asked or guided yet to collect the COVID vaccination on students. That's still pending. Kelly mentioned we do collect vaccination information for other vaccinations, but we have not been directed to collect it for schools yet.
Thank you. And there are two related questions in terms of the distinctions between the screening requirements for catechetical programs and then the screening requirements for schools. So one of them is, will RCA Adapted for Children, children's catechetical programs be required to do the screening of students similar to the way that the schools are doing them?
No.
Okay.
We don't have access to a system like Rediker that's built in completely to the schools. That's something we just don't have access to. Screening is still going to be your best friend. Like, it is helpful to know and encourage people to be attentive to any symptoms they have, but we're not requiring that you use an app. If you took temperatures this year and you want to continue to do that, you can, but that's not mandated either. I think, just a reminder to parents on a regular basis that please watch your child for symptoms. If they were in school at the public school this week and there was an outbreak, at their particular school, please advise them to stay at home. But we're not in a position in most of our programs, except for perhaps our very big programs that look more like a school, to do that kind of really systematic tracking.
Thank you, Sarah. And this is a related question, but in terms of mask usage for parish catechetical programs, which we mentioned was highly recommended, though not required. The question is, will there be some form of communication to pastors informing them that masking at faith formation parish activities is at their discretion versus the requirement for schools, for example?
Yes, they'll get the same document. As I said, the document that the guiding document for this presentation is being sent to the pastors before it goes to the leaders. So they will have access to the same information you received today in a much more robust form. So yes, that will be communicated to pastors.
Thank you. Are there specific COVID guidelines for offsite trips from Catholic Mutual at this time, or are they unchanged from what they've been throughout the pandemic? And it's noted we should all follow state and local guidelines, but in addition to that, if there are any other COVID guidelines from Catholic Mutual.
So it's my understanding that if parishes want to plan an offsite gathering, that they should contact Catholic Mutual as they've done previously in order to make sure all the applicable insurance paperwork and questions are answered. Catholic Mutual simply can't provide a blanket answer because it's going to depend on where you're going, how many people are coming with you, how you're getting there, how you're getting back home, and the nature of the activity. So those questions are better asked directly to Catholic Mutual rather than CPA staff.
I would like to follow up on that. Also, for quite a few programs, bring in speakers for typically confirmation retreats. Something like Net Ministries. You would want to make sure that those individuals are not only child protection compliant like they typically are, but you would want to make sure you are aware of what their safety and screening protocols are before that, those kind of groups would come in. And again, Catholic Mutual may be able to give some guidance on that. But at a minimum, those groups you need to either see if because they travel so much, especially Net Ministries. Not that I'm picking on them, but they just travel around so much that you would want to make sure that they either have a negative COVID test or have been fully vaccinated before you invite, one of those kind of groups in for a retreat experience.
Thank you. This question is in terms of safe environment training. Will and when will safe environment workshops move to more in-person rather than online? I believe that's kind of been covered thus far, but Sarah, if you would like to expand on that.
So that sounds like a Virtus adult clearance question. So that's how I'm hearing that. So that you would need to check with the Office for Child Protection because they are the ones who do all of the compliance aspects for adult volunteers, and they would know if they're going to transition back to in-person Virtus training or if that will continue to be online. If you're talking about the safe environment training that's required for all students in our programs, that must be done in person in the coming year.
Thank you. And then related to that, in regards to the Circle of Grace program, that should also be implemented in person, how recommendations for how it could be implemented in person if the building is not suitable for in-person learning. There's some concerns about children that are under the age of 12, not vaccinated, catechists not vaccinated, windows that can't be opened, those kinds of restrictions. So recommendations for how it can be done in these situations. I'm going to
ask that person contact me directly because I'm thinking that most of if a parish is meeting in person for ministry, safe environment training would be done in person. So it sounds like that parish may be opting for completely virtual or online. So if you don't mind, just email me or give me a call this afternoon and I can discuss that with you. But if you're meeting in person in any way, shape, or form, whether it's a monthly model, a weekly model, a bi-weekly model, safe environment training must be done in person. So if you're gathering, it must be done in person.
Perfect, thank you. And I believe, Janine, you spoke on this earlier in the presentation in terms of retreats. Are overnight retreats acceptable at this time?
They are acceptable at this time as long as they comply with the previous policies and procedures that were in place and are still in place.
Perfect, thank you. And this is a music ministry question, and the one who's asking also says that it may just be a separate webinar, but I'm going to pose it to the team here, asking in terms of gathering for rehearsals, are there any protocols in terms of masks, in terms of number of singers, any recommendations for how those gatherings for rehearsals for choirs can proceed if they can at this time?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I think if the person who posted it can email me or call me later today, I can talk specifically with them. But the music ministry questions are really being dealt with the Office of Divine Worship. They are the ones taking care of very specific liturgy questions. And there will be more information forthcoming, but if that person wants to give me a call, I'm happy to speak to them later.
Thank you. And this is more of a general question. How do scouting programs fit into all of these guidelines?
Sure.
So I'm not sure if that's also CYO or Janine.
It is, yeah, I'll handle that one. So Catholic Scouting is a part of CYO. Catholic Youth Organization oversees athletics, youth ministry, and Catholic Scouting. So again, Catholic Scouting that is a part of CYO is considered a parish ministry and should be able to use parish and school buildings as they had before the pandemic. I know that Mary Fava and Kevin Donahue at CYO have been working with scouting leaders. So if you have specific questions about doing scouting activities, please reach out to Kevin and Mary. They'd be more than happy to work with you. they are on vacation this week. So if you email them, wait until, don't be surprised until you don't hear until next week.
And Janine, I'd like to just add to that in relation to schools. We have a plan for extracurriculars and third-party vendors. We have chess organizations who come in and work with students. You know, different organizations. There's some sporting organizations that come in and run clinics, and we are resuming that for next year. But we've asked school leaders to fill out a form that we have provided for us to be able to see the organization's safety protocols. And we are approving that organization's protocols and then posting it to our principal portal saying that this organization is approved to go ahead and continue with extracurriculars. These are primarily after-school events, third-party vendors.
Thank you all. And this is again in regards to mask usage. Will masks be mandatory in lower grades, particularly K through 5?
At this time, they are mandatory. I'll emphasize that by saying we know that this is fluid. We are watching it closely. And again, that those students at that age are not currently vaccinated. So the plan is at this time is that they would be returning with face coverings.
Schools.
Schools, yes.
Yeah, so again, I strongly recommend that you enforce mask wearing with our younger students. It's just the best way to keep our children safe at this point since they're not vaccinated. However, because our time with the students is less and the expectation is not required during mass necessarily, it is not mandated. Again, if you are at a parish with a school and during the school year they're wearing masks, then I would say follow that. Again, check with your pastor too to see what his preference is in this situation.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And then the final question that we have is, will the faith knowledge assessment be administered online as an option in spring 2022?
You mean for, I'm assuming this means for schools, it's always online. For parishes, probably not, because when it's offered online or in person, it takes on a different, we can't compare them as apples to apples because there's testing elements of online and in person or pencil paper that are different. So for parishes, it will continue as it has always been to be paper pencil format of the assessment.
Thank you so much. That concludes our questions.
Thank you, Kaylee.
All right, any final comments, Janine, Sarah?
Kaylee, thank you for moderating for us.
Yes.
It was a huge help. And thank you everyone for your questions and for attending today.
Yes, and if you have questions as you look through this, and once you get the full packet of guidelines, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us with your questions, and we'll do our best to help you. We're trying to be flexible too as we help and grow together, and in our return to the familiar and yet unfamiliar, life of ministry and school.
Thank you. All right, that concludes our time together. We wish you all well and have a wonderful, wonderful, restful, and joyful summer.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Everyone. Kaylee, can you help me end?
Yes.